right, guys, welcome on back to the show. This is our last segment of the show, and we're going to be switching some gears here a little bit. We're going to be moving into some college football talk. I know we talk a lot of NFL here, but obviously college football is starting spring training on a lot of campuses over the country here. So, figure we might as well, with the college basketball March Madness going on, I felt like now is a good time to kind of dip into some college football, just to kind of talk all things college, So, top 5 college football teams I think could surprise some people. Now, I think I should say, because I got a little bit of pushback in the production meeting about some of my picks here, but I just want to reiterate, like I did in the production meeting, that this list that I have here is not a list that is teams that I think could challenge for a national championship or even make the playoffs for that matter. Some of these teams may make the playoffs, but overall, this is just teams that I think could surprise some people in terms of like maybe they are a little bit more successful than what people might think they might be. So, very low standards I'm going with here. I'm not going for the glory just yet. That'll come once the college football season gets closer and closer to kicking off. We'll look more into teams that I think could win the national championship. But as of right now, this is just teams that I think could surprise. And also, I should also say that I don't have North Carolina on this list anymore, but I did before. In the production meeting, I got a little bit of pushback saying that Texas Tech wasn't on the list, and the more and more I researched it, the more I was, found to be incorrect on leaving Texas Tech off. So Texas Tech is on this list, of course, but just a little special shout out to North Carolina because, of course, they have Bill Belichick. So I feel like, if anything, it'll be interesting to watch them as the season goes along to see if he can translate his monumental success that he had in the NFL, if he can translate that to college football. So that'll be fun to watch. But starting off with the first team, and this is in no particular order, the first team that I have on the list is the team that I just touched on a second ago, and that is Texas Tech. Take a look at what they did last year. They finished 8-4 last year, 6-3 in Big 12 play. They did have one of the nation's top recruiting classes this year, so I think that'll absolutely improve where they stand. They could end up having, they're one of these teams that could sneak into the playoffs potentially in the Big 12. They have a returning quarterback, Baron Morton. He did have that offseason shoulder surgery, so that is admittedly a little bit of a question. And the other question that they have really is that they have to replace their standout running back, Taj Brooks, who, of course, is no longer on the team. So they'll have to improve that. But, they do. He was the all-time career leading rusher in Texas Tech history. So obviously that's hard to replace a guy like that. But, they could potentially, do that. They head coach Joey McGuire. He added 17 players in the transfer portal, not to mention, players just from recruiting and things like that. But in the transfer portal, he added a lot of guys there and a lot of former 4-star recruits in that transfer portal too. So that will, of course, make them more and more interesting to watch, and definitely keep a close eye on Texas Tech as they could sneak into the college football playoff, especially with the 12-team expansion, that they started last year. So wouldn't be surprised if Texas Tech snuck in there. They could end up having a pretty good year. So we'll see if they, back up what I'm saying here. So moving on to the SEC, we've got LSU. I like what they've done. I like what they did last year towards the end of the year, and I like the fact that they're returning their quarterback, Garrett Nussmeier. And they do have a relatively favorable schedule, as favorable as you can, say in the SEC. But the reason I say that is because there are 3 playoff teams from the SEC that they do not have to play this year, and that is Georgia, Tennessee, and Texas. All 3 very, very good teams from a year ago, so they get a little bit of the benefit of the doubt by not playing those guys. They're still a good team anyway, so, that's the thing that could have maybe stopped them from making the playoffs, is having to run a gauntlet like those 3 teams. They don't have to do that this year. They still have several teams, that are going to be tough. They could potentially get to like a 3-0 record before they have to take on Florida, who I think is another up-and-coming team that I'll touch on here in a little bit. But they could potentially see themselves going to a 3-0, maybe 4-0 start if they're able to knock off Florida. So we'll see what happens with them. I mean, they do have the number one ranked transfer portal overall in the nation. So they had two new coordinators last year, and I think that is another thing that you have to take into account. They had two new coordinators on both offense and defense, so now there's more continuity there. So second year guys, they more adapt to what they want to run and what they want to call. So I feel like there'll be a little bit more comfortability there in LSU. Defense should be better due to all those transfer additions. Number one transfer portal, you better get some quality players if you're getting ranked that. So I think that they definitely will have that. They do start the season at Clemson, which will be tough to play in Death Valley there. And they also, another thing to think about, they haven't won a season opener since 2019. So this is going on 6 years if they're unable to do it this year at Clemson. But I think they have a good enough team to where they can absolutely do that. And, we'll see, if they can break that streak of season opening losses as we start the college football season in just a few months. But moving on to the next team on my list, I have Michigan. And Michigan, of course, head coach Sharon Moore is going into his second year. They didn't have a whole lot to shout about last year, but they did end the season pretty strong. They beat both Ohio State and Alabama towards the end of the year. And Ohio State, obviously, we know, ended up going on to win the national championship. But, Ohio State, they've done a pretty good job against Ohio State in recent years, dating back to when they still had Jim Harbaugh and all that. But Sharon Moore was the head coach this year, and a lot of people just assumed that Ohio State was just going to wipe the floor with them because of how good Ohio State was last year. But Michigan pulled the upset. It was a very low-scoring game. They played the way they wanted to play, and they were physical, and they did a very good job. And they did a similar thing to Alabama when they played them later on. The only thing with Michigan is they did lose several key players to the NFL draft: Mason Graham, Colston Loveland, both the defensive lineman and tight end, respectively. So they lost a couple other guys too. So they'll have to adjust to that. But they did have some additions via recruiting and the transfer portal, and I think that'll help overall just help improve the team. Their defensive coordinator, Wink Martindale, does return. They struggled a little bit at the beginning of the year, but at the end of the year, with his 3 back-to-back strong performances, both against Indiana, who were a threat last year, Ohio State, who won the national championship, and Alabama, who, of course, are Alabama, and they're always a tough team to play. So those 3 strong performances, maybe they can translate that into next year and carry the momentum into this next year and be one of those teams that, could potentially sneak into the playoffs. You never know. But the Big Ten is a very, very hard conference, one of the best, if not the best now. It was the SEC for a while, but the Big Ten, I think you can make the argument that they're the best conference now. But, so we'll see what Michigan can do. It's going to be tough for them. They've got a tough schedule, but they could still make some noise, I think, overall. But moving on, the next team that I have, we got 2 more teams left on this. So the next team I have is South Carolina. And South Carolina, they're coming off a very strong season in which they won 9 games, and they were in the top 25 most of the year. I think the early projections that they had, early rankings that I've seen, they had them ranked at like 22, I believe. But you take a look at their quarterback, Lenoris Sellers. He's a dual threat guy. He's an electric quarterback. He's coming back. And another thing is tight end Michael Smith. I feel like he's going to be a matchup nightmare for teams. Just look at his size overall. He's 6'6", 250-pound tight end. He didn't have, many catches or anything like that last year, but that's because they already had a solid tight end already. And of course, he is no longer on the team. So Michael Smith will be the guy, the tight end 1, on this roster. And I think he could absolutely be a nightmare for defenses at his size. If he can just, shore up his ball catching abilities and some route running and things like that, I think he could end up being a very, very good player. He was a freshman last year, so going into his second year, he's got a lot more responsibility. So we'll see if he can end up, being that big tight end that they want. Defensively, that is where their strength lies. They have Dylan Stewart. He's a beast of a pass rusher. Last year, of course, they had Kyle Kennard, who was the SEC Player of the Year. he paired with Dylan Stewart, and that was a fierce pass rush that they had. Their secondary is, believe it or not, their strength. They have a very, very good secondary as well. And dipping over a little bit into the offensive side of the ball as well, one of the more underrated acquisitions that they got through the transfer portal was Rashul Faison, the running back out of Utah State. I think that was a solid get for them. He could be an explosive guy. And only 4 other transfer portal running backs had better yardage than Faison last year. So I think he could end up being a solid piece for them going forward. South Carolina, that's a team I think could absolutely sneak into the playoffs, because building off of a 9-win season, and they've got a lot of positive things, a lot of hype coming out of South Carolina this offseason. So it'll be fun to see them see what they do going forward. But the last team on my list, I admittedly left them last because I am a Gator fan, so selfishly I wanted to talk about them last. So the thing that excites me about the Florida Gators this year is DJ Lagway, mainly, because I feel like he is the type of guy that the Gators have been looking for, in terms of athletic ability and all that, since Tim Tebow left. I mean, Lagway didn't go crazy in terms of numbers last year, but he was very good at the end of the year. He started and finished 6 games. He did deal with some injuries here and there. He was a freshman last year too, so that's also got to be taken into account. He threw for 9 touchdowns, and the hope really is that with a full offseason as the starter, he will just only get better. And he was on pace to get about 25 touchdown passes overall last year if he would have started every game. So he, I think, can improve. Of course, his athletic ability is obviously a big asset for that offense. And he won MVP in the Gators bowl game last year. And he also, the thing that I really, really liked is just some of the things he said after the game and how he's just not satisfied. And you could tell the guy is hungry to be better and hungry to succeed at Florida. And that's the kind of player that you want. You want a guy that wants to be there and a guy that wants to win, not just, put his name down so he can have a nice big contract when he gets to the NFL. Obviously that's a perk, and obviously he would want to do that, but I like guys that want to win. That's the great thing about college football, is that I feel like there are more guys in college football that really truly want to win than there are in the NFL. Not to say that there's not a lot of guys in the NFL that are like that. It's just college. I feel like it means more to them because they're fighting for their future, essentially. Whereas the NFL, they've made it, and of course the next goal in the NFL is winning a Super Bowl. So, there's motivation there, of course, from players, but I feel like college football players are a lot hungrier, at this point of their careers. The Gators secondary as well, they're returning 4 starters, so that defense should be improved. That's the one thing that I have said watching the Gators, is that their defense really has been the thing that's let them down over the course of the last couple of years, which is unfortunate because their defense is typically very, very good, and it's usually the offense that struggles. But the offense, I think, will be better, and the defense, I think, will be better. Don't think Florida's going to make the playoffs or anything like that. I just think that they could be a much better team than they were last year and build on some of that momentum that they got last year towards the end of the year with DJ Lagway running the show. As long as he can stay healthy, I think the Gators could make some noise overall. So we'll be interesting to see how everything goes, but that should just about do it for this show. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know it's a little bit of a long show, but I do appreciate everybody sticking around and watching the show throughout. Thank you once again just for tuning in to the GSMC Football Podcast. Of course, we're always presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support does mean a lot to us, so please remember just to subscribe to the show and leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. So we also do invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, X, and Instagram, and all of the other social media outlets for more content and more updates. Thank you once again, and tomorrow keep an eye out for our show as we're going to continue or finish off our mock draft and continue some season outlooks as well. So take a look out for that, and overall, I hope you guys have a wonderful night. Thanks.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to